A unique feature of the 1908, whoops, we're going to go back. A unique feature of the 1908 campaign was the appearance of the political postcard. Some were partisan and referenced campaign issues in a mini poster format, while others merely identified the candidates, often in a humorous way. Some were forerunners of what we know today as negative campaigning. They probably had little effect upon the election's outcome, but they do provide a fertile field for collectors of political ephemera. The picture postcard reached its heyday in the first years of the 20th century, so it is no surprise that they were soon adapted for political purposes. The Nebraska State Journal newspaper here in Lincoln in August 1908 predicted, however, that the card's main benefits would be to, quote, help diminish the annual postal deficit. Nevertheless, the postcards anticipated future political patterns by simplifying issues and putting the focus on the candidates. I've just got a selection of some that I'll show you here. These first group I would call ID cards. They don't really have a major political message, and of course this one connects Bryan to Nebraska very well with the corn. This one, I'm not sure exactly what it's supposed to mean. It could mean that Bryan wanted to regulate the railroads, or it could mean that he was just on the trains all the time, which is certainly true as well. This one actually was copyrighted before the election, if you'll notice down below. Here's a basic ID card. There's Taft, just staring out at the audience. This one is designed to be sort of humorous, and of course, if you took away the picture of Bryan, it isn't really even a political card. In fact, you could make a Taft card by just pasting Taft's picture on there, but an example of the kind of cards that were circulating at that time. Here's one, of course, that is an effort to connect Bryan to his party, and if you pull the tail, you get Bryan popping out. Then there were some that made much of the fact that you had both candidates being named William, and so either way, the president was bound to be Bill. And I thought to myself, well, I don't know if that looks like Taft, but it certainly doesn't look like Bryan's profile. It looks more like Ebenezer Scrooge or somebody, but anyway, so they weren't terribly careful in making sure that some of these things really resembled anyone. Then you have what I would call issue cards that do actually try to make a political statement. Here's a good one that does contrast Bryan as the champion of the little man, the guy that does actually go out in the hayfield, and he did occasionally go out at Fairview and do a little work on the farm, and so he's he's being tied in with the rail splitter, whereas Taft, of course, is the tool of Wall Street and industrial interests, plays golf, the plutocrat. And Taft did play golf, by the way. I guess he was maybe the first president that really played golf, and I believe just after he got the nomination, before the campaign really got underway, his doctors advised him to lose some weight, so he went out and played golf for about 2 or 3 weeks. But he probably ate while he was doing it. So here's another one. Of course, this is again an effort to simplify the issues. If Bryan gets elected, he'll kick out the trusts, and the Democratic donkey is, of course, giving them a pounding, and of course the GOP elephant's looking the other way while these trusts have been inhabiting the government and weaseling their influence into the White House. This one is from the 1908 campaign, and it's an effort for the Democrats to get more support from the working man. That the Republican dinner pail is defunct, and if you want to have a full dinner pail, why vote for the Democrats. Then you get into what I really do think are kind of like negative campaigning. Certainly, here's one that shows Bryan as various forms of little old ladies and sort of crackpot imagery, wearing all these different hats and suggesting perhaps that Bryan just tells people what they want to hear depending on who he's talking to. The whole Democratic Party is here. This must have been produced by the Republicans for sure. Here's probably about the most negative one I found relating to Bryan. He's a cuckoo. He's a nut. If you look up at the top, Bryan being the clock, he'll keep on running and it'll soon make him a bunch of money even if the alarm doesn't go off, sort of suggesting that all of his issues have been sort of radical, alarmist things, and you don't want to have this nut in the White House. But by golly, if he doesn't make it this time, he might run again in 1912. And then finally, I assume this came out before the election, but it turned out to be sort of true in the end, because he did go 3 strikes, but he didn't really go out. I mean, he still stayed active in politics for a long time and was still a leader of the party or a major leader of the party for some time. But clearly, again, whoever produced this card wanted Bryan to get out of politics and go back to his farm and pitch some hay. Now, Bryan campaigned in 1908 at about the same frantic pace that he had demonstrated in the 2 earlier elections in 1896 and 1900. He spent about 60 days on the road, giving as many as 24 speeches a day, and his exertions finally forced Taft, who hated to go out and talk apparently, but it finally forced Taft to go to the stump as well, as they said in those days. And Roosevelt was kind of pushing Taft to get out there. We can't let Bryan just go around the country unopposed. Late in October, the locomotive on Bryan's special campaign train broke down, but Bryan did not break down. He held up through the end and gave his final speech here in Lincoln on the evening of November 2nd, which was the day before the election. Then he went back to Fairview and sat there and waited till the returns came in. On the morning of November 4th, although not all the votes had been reported, Bryan realized he had lost. Taft won 321 electoral votes to Bryan's 162, and Taft had a popular vote majority of more than 1 million. Scholars have attributed Bryan's defeat to several factors. Perhaps most important was the electorate's general satisfaction with Roosevelt's presidency and the assumption that those policies would continue under Taft. One slogan from this period, Republican slogan, was, "Roosevelt has cut the hay, Taft is the man to put it in the barn." Also, Roosevelt and the Republicans had already co-opted several of the progressive ideas that Bryan had been promoting. And one scholar has said Roosevelt really didn't do a whole lot, but he went just far enough with reform that he got the image as a reformer, and it kind of kept down any popular complaints. On the other hand, because of this and other reasons, Bryan and the Democratic Party really didn't have or failed to develop a compelling argument that they could use in 1908 why the voters should abandon the status quo. The Democratic slogan was something like, "Shall the people rule?" and it was just kind of vague and fuzzy. In many ways, the campaign actually was a contest between Bryan and Roosevelt, and even during the campaign, they actually debated the issues in an exchange of letters and telegrams, which were made public. And as I said earlier, Roosevelt pretty much took charge of Taft's campaign in terms of telling him what to do and when to do it. Although Bryan was disappointed and perplexed by his overwhelming defeat, he really wasn't bitter. He said he felt like the drunken man who tried to pass by a doorman to get into a club. On his first try, the drunk was gently pushed down the steps. On his second attempt, he got inside the door and was thrown out. He tried once again and was violently ejected. Getting up and dusting himself off, the man remarked, "I am on to those people. They don't want me in there." And Bryan apparently told that story fairly often.